Texas, 1945. The sun blazed across a sky so wide it felt endless, burning down on the wire fences and wooden guard towers of Camp Swift. Dust hung in the air, still as glass, while a young German woman named Elsa Müller stood frozen at the corral fence, her knuckles white against the weathered wood. She had crossed an ocean in chains, expecting execution or endless labor. Instead, she faced something more terrifying than any American punishment she'd imagined. A chestnut mare named Copper and a lanky cowboy named Jim Holloway, who believed every soul, even an enemy's, deserved to know freedom on horseback. The cattle cars rattled south from New York in late January 1945. Inside, 37 German women pressed against wooden slats, watching America unfold through gaps in the wood. Farmland stretched forever. No bomb craters, no skeletal trees, just snow-dusted fields and red barns that looked like illustrations from children's books. Elsa Müller was 23 years old. She had been a signals operator in the Wehrmacht, captured near the Belgian border when her unit surrendered after the Ardennes offensive collapsed. The propaganda had told her Americans tortured prisoners, shot them in ditches, fed them to dogs. Instead, they had given her a wool blanket on the transport ship. The train lurched to a stop outside Bastrop, Texas. February heat hit them like an open oven door, despite the winter month. Nothing like the cold Baltic winds of home. Guards led them down onto a platform where locals had gathered, silent and curious. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts. An old man chewed tobacco and watched without expression. "Move along," a guard said, not unkindly. His rifle hung loose on his shoulder. From there, they were placed on trucks that drove through countryside so open it made Elsa dizzy. Germany had trees everywhere, forests that swallowed sound. Here the horizon swallowed fear. It stretched so far she felt small and visible all at once. Camp Swift appeared as a collection of wooden barracks surrounded by wire fencing that looked almost decorative compared to the fortifications she'd known in Europe. Guard towers stood at corners, but the guards inside them seemed more interested in magazines than prisoners. One waved as they passed. "This is it," whispered Greta Hoffman, another prisoner, in German. "This is it," Elsa replied. They had expected concrete and iron. Instead, they found wooden structures painted white, with actual windows and screens. Barracks that looked temporary, impermanent, like someone planned to take them down after the war and forget they'd ever existed. The camp commander, Colonel Frank Morrison, addressed them through an interpreter that first evening. He was a thick-built man with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen action in the previous war. "You are prisoners of war," he said, "but you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will work. You will eat. You will be housed appropriately. Any attempt to escape will be punished, but cooperation will be acknowledged. Welcome to Texas." Welcome. The word hung strange in the mess hall that night. Elsa sat with her tin plate of beef stew, actual beef, not the sawdust bread and turnip water of her last months in Germany, and felt the cognitive dissonance settle in her chest like stones. "They're fattening us up," Greta whispered, "for something." But the days passed and no execution came. Only work. They were assigned to agricultural support. The men's camp down the road handled heavy construction, but the women were distributed among local farms and ranches that had lost workers to the war effort. Every able-bodied American man under 30 seemed to be overseas, leaving the ranches desperate for hands. Elsa's group of 7 was assigned to the Double H Ranch, owned by the Holloway family. They drove out each morning in a covered truck, past mesquite trees and limestone hills that glowed gold in the early light. The ranch sprawled across 1,500 acres of cattle country, with a main house painted white, a barn the color of dried blood, and corrals that stretched into arrangements Elsa couldn't yet understand. Jim Holloway met them the first morning. He was perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and hands that looked carved from the same wood as his fence posts. He wore a Stetson pushed back on his head and boots with spurs that jingled softly when he walked. "You folks will be helping out here," he said slowly, as if speaking to children or animals. "Feeding, cleaning, mending fence, garden work if you're up for it. Nobody's asking you to break horses or rope cattle. Just honest work for honest pay. Pay. They received 80 cents a day in camp scrip usable at the canteen. It was more money than Elsa had seen in months. The work was hard but straightforward. Hauling feed buckets, mucking stalls, mending tiers in burlap sacks. The other women took to it with grim efficiency, but Elsa found herself drawn always to the corrals where the horses stood. She had never been close to a horse. In her village outside Bremen, horses were for wealthy landowners or military officers. Common people walked or rode bicycles. The horses here seemed enormous to her, muscles moving under glossy hides like water under silk. But they also terrified her. On her third day, a stallion named Thunder kicked out at a bucket, and Elsa jumped backward so violently she fell into a water trough. The other women laughed, not cruelly, but with the release of tension that came from seeing someone else embarrass themselves instead. Jim Holloway appeared around the barn corner, leading that chestnut mare. "You all right there?" he asked. Elsa nodded, dripping. Her English was poor but functional. "Yes, sorry." "Horses spook easy," he said. "But they're more scared of you than you are of them." He paused, looking at her face. "Well, maybe not in your case." That evening back at camp, Elsa wrote in the diary the Red Cross had provided. "The horses here are like moving mountains. I cannot understand how people climb onto their backs and make them obey. It seems like magic or madness." March brought wildflowers. The Texas landscape exploded in blue bonnets and Indian paintbrush, color so vibrant it hurt to look at directly. The work continued, a rhythm emerging. Morning truck rides, 8 hours of ranch labor, evening return to camp where they ate better food than they'd seen in Germany for 3 years, and slept without the sound of bombs. Jim Holloway watched them work with quiet attention. He corrected gently when they made mistakes with feeding schedules or gate latches. He showed them how to approach the cattle without spooking them, how to read weather in the morning sky, how to tell by smell when hay had gone bad. One afternoon, he found Elsa standing alone by the corral, watching Copper graze. The mare's coat shone like polished wood in the spring sun. "You watch her a lot," Jim said. Elsa startled. Yes, she is beautiful." "She's gentle," Jim said. "Raised her from a foal. She's trained for kids and nervous riders." He adjusted his hat against the glare. "You ever wanted to ride?" Elsa's breath caught. "No, I am afraid." "I can see that," Jim said. "Fear's not a sin, but it's a shame to let fear stop you from something fine." He paused. "I could teach you if you wanted." Elsa looked at him sharply, searching for mockery or ulterior motive, but his face showed only patient curiosity, the same expression he wore when training a young horse. "Why?" she asked. Jim considered this. "I spent 18 months in North Africa with the army," he said finally. "Got discharged after El Alamein with shrapnel in my leg. I saw what fear does to people. Watched men freeze up and watched men push through it." He met her eyes. "You're a prisoner, but you're still a person. Seems to me a person ought to know what it feels like to ride." That night, Elsa lay in her bunk and tried to understand this strange American logic. In Germany, prisoners were enemies. Here, they were problems to be managed with unexpected generosity. The cognitive dissonance had weight. "He wants something," Greta whispered from the next bunk. "They all do." But Elsa wasn't certain. There had been nothing transactional in Jim Holloway's face. Only a cowboy's fundamental belief that everyone should know horses. The first lesson happened on a Saturday afternoon in late March. The regular work was done, and Jim brought Copper to a small training corral away from the other horses. Elsa approached like someone walking toward execution. "First thing," Jim said, "is you don't approach a horse like you're scared. They feel it. You gotta be calm even if you're faking it." He demonstrated. Steady walk, hand extended, voice low and even. Copper nuzzled his palm, entirely unbothered. "Your turn." Elsa's legs felt like water, but she forced herself forward, one step at a time. Copper's large, dark eye watched her approach. The mare could kill her with one kick, could rear up and smash her skull, could breathe. Jim said quietly. She can hear your heart beating. Slow it down. Elsa focused on her breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. She extended her hand the way Jim had shown her. Copper's nose was velvet soft against her palm, warm and alive. The mare's breath huffed against her fingers. Something in Elsa's chest unlocked. There you go, Jim said. That's the first step. Just touching. They spent that first session simply standing with the horse. Jim explained Copper's body language. The ears, the tail, the way she shifted weight. He showed Elsa how to brush the mare's coat. Long, smooth strokes that made Copper's eyes half close in pleasure. Horses are honest, Jim said while Elsa brushed. They don't lie about what they're feeling. You always know where you stand with a horse. Unlike people, Elsa thought. Unlike propaganda and prison camps and wars where enemies gave you blankets. The second lesson came a week later. Jim taught her to saddle Copper, the weight of the saddle, the cinch tightening, the way the mare accepted the bit without resistance. Each piece of tack had a name and a purpose. Jim's hands moved with the unconscious grace of 40 years' practice. My daddy taught me when I was 5, he said. His daddy taught him. Goes back to before Texas was even a state. Your family has always been here? Elsa asked. Since 1845, we came west from Tennessee looking for space. He gestured at the endless horizon. Found plenty of it. The third lesson, in mid-April, was mounting. Jim showed her the stirrup, the proper position, the way to swing up in one smooth motion. Then he stood beside Copper and held the reins steady. Whenever you're ready, he said. Elsa's heart hammered. The saddle seemed impossibly high off the ground, but she put her foot in the stirrup, gripped the saddle horn, and pulled herself up with strength built from weeks of ranch work. The world tilted. She was higher than she'd ever been without stairs. Copper shifted beneath her, a living, moving mountain, and Elsa's fear spiked white-hot. Easy, Jim said. To her or the horse, she couldn't tell. Just sit, feel how she moves when she breathes, that's all, just feel it. Elsa sat. Copper's breathing rose and fell beneath her. The mare's warmth seeped through the leather and fabric into Elsa's legs. Slowly, carefully, her panic began to ebb. Good, Jim said quietly. Real good. They stood like that for 10 minutes. No movement, just presence. When Elsa finally dismounted, her legs shook, but something inside her had shifted. She had sat on a horse and not died. That evening she wrote, Today I sat on a mountain and it held me gently. May brought heat that made even the Texans complain. The ranch work started earlier to beat the worst of the sun. Elsa had progressed to walking Copper around the small corral while Jim watched and called instructions. Heels down, shoulders back. Don't hold the reins like you're drowning, let them rest easy. The other German women had noticed the lessons. Some found it strange. A few found it suspicious. But Greta, who had softened over the months of decent treatment, just shrugged. If the cowboy wants to teach you to ride, let him teach you to ride, she said. Stranger things have happened. Indeed they had. News filtered into camp of Germany's collapse. The Reich that was supposed to last 1,000 years had lasted 12. Hitler was dead. Berlin had fallen. The war in Europe was over. In the mess hall that night, the German women sat in stunned silence. They were no longer soldiers of an active military power. They were just prisoners now, waiting to see what came next. Jim didn't mention the news when Elsa arrived for her lesson the next Saturday. He just brought Copper out and said, Today we're going to try trotting. The trot was harder than walking. It required rhythm, posting up and down with the horse's gait. Elsa bounced awkwardly at first, teeth rattling, convinced she'd fall and break her neck. With the horse not against her, Jim called. Feel the rhythm, 1, 2, 1, 2. She found it suddenly, the moment when her body synced with Copper's movement. The bouncing smoothed into a rise and fall pattern that felt almost like dancing. There, Jim shouted, that's it, you got it. Elsa felt something close to joy. Not happiness exactly, but something larger. A sense of competence, of mastery, of being more than a prisoner or a clerk or a defeated enemy. On the back of this horse, she was simply a rider. They circled the corral 3 times at a trot before Copper slowed back to a walk. Elsa's thighs burned and her back ached, but she was grinning. "Next week," Jim said, "we'll try the open trail." Elsa's grin faltered. "Outside the corral. Can't learn to really ride in a circle," Jim said. "Horse needs space to run. So do you." That night, lying in her bunk, Elsa considered this. The lessons had been contained, controlled, safe within the wooden rails of the corral. But a trail ride meant open land, meant trust, meant something she couldn't quite name. Greta's voice came from the darkness. "You're going to do it, aren't you?" "I think I have to," Elsa replied. "Americans are strange," Greta said. But there was no judgment in her voice, only wonder. The first Saturday of June dawned clear and hot. Jim arrived with Copper already saddled, and his own horse, a tall bay gelding named Rebel, tied beside her. "We'll ride out to the north pasture," Jim said. "It's about 2 miles, take us maybe 40 minutes at an easy pace. You feel comfortable with that?" No, Elsa thought, but she nodded anyway. Jim mounted Rebel with the easy grace of someone who'd spent more time in saddles than chairs. Elsa pulled herself onto Copper, with considerably less grace but growing confidence. Her boots settled into the stirrups. Her hands found the reins. "Ready?" Jim asked. "Ready," Elsa lied. They walked the horses out of the corral and onto a dirt trail that wound through mesquite and limestone. The ranch spread out around them, cattle dotting distant hills, windmills turning lazy circles, fences stretching toward the horizon. The morning sun painted everything gold and amber. Copper walked with steady certainty beneath Elsa. The mare knew this trail, had walked it 1,000 times. Elsa began to relax into the rhythm. "How long have you had her?" Elsa asked. 8 years, Jim said. "Trained her myself from a yearling. She's smart, sometimes too smart. She knows when you're distracted." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Birds called from mesquite branches. The leather creaked with each step. Elsa found herself noticing details she'd never seen from the truck. The way grass grew in thick clumps, the color of the limestone, the distant curve of a creek. "This is beautiful," she said quietly. "It is," Jim agreed. "People ask me why I came back here instead of staying in the city after the war. This is why. Out here things make sense. A horse is a horse. Work is work. The land doesn't lie to you." They reached the north pasture, a wide clearing with a stock tank reflecting the sky. Jim dismounted and loosened Rebel's girth. Elsa did the same with Copper, moving through the steps Jim had taught her. "You've come a long way," Jim said, watching her work, "from that girl who fell in the water trough." Elsa laughed, a real laugh, the first in years. "I was so embarrassed." "Don't be. Fear's natural. Overcoming it is what matters." He paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "What happened to you?" Jim asked. "I mean, before you got captured. What was your life?" Elsa sat down on a limestone boulder. The stone was warm from the sun. "I worked in communications, radios mostly. My father was a postal worker. My mother died when I was 12. I wanted to be a teacher." She picked at a thread on her sleeve. "Then the war came and there were no choices anymore. You did what they told you or you didn't survive." Jim nodded slowly. "I had a buddy in Africa. German fellow we captured outside Tunis. He told me something similar. Said he never wanted any of it, but the machine had already started rolling." "What happened to him?" Elsa asked. "Sent to a camp in New Mexico. Last I heard he was working on a dairy farm and planning to stay after the war if they'd let him." The idea bloomed in Elsa's mind like those impossible bluebonnets, vivid and startling. Stay. The word had weight. June became July. Elsa's riding improved until she could canter Copper around the corral without conscious thought. The horse and rider had found their rhythm together. Jim talked about teaching her to rope, maybe even some basic cutting work with the cattle. Then the Army intelligence officers arrived. They came to Camp Swift on a Tuesday, in a khaki staff car that looked official and ominous. 2 men in pressed uniforms with captain's bars. They met with Colonel Morrison, then requested interviews with several of the German women prisoners. Elsa was called to the administration building that afternoon. The officers sat behind a desk with folders open in front of them. One was older, maybe 40, with sharp eyes. The other was younger, taking notes. "Miss Miller," the older officer said in German. "I'm Captain Weber, this is Captain Collins. We'd like to ask you some questions about your work detail." Elsa's mouth went dry. "Yes, sir. You've been assigned to the Holloway Ranch for approximately 4 months now, is that correct?" "Yes, sir. And during that time you've developed a relationship with the ranch owner, James Holloway?" The word relationship hung heavy with implication. Elsa felt her face flush. "He has taught me to ride horses, that is all." "You spend time alone with him regularly," Captain Weber said, consulting his notes. "Off-property trail rides, extended lessons without supervision from other American personnel." "The trail rides are on his property," Elsa said carefully. "And there are always ranch hands nearby." "Nevertheless," Captain Weber continued, "fraternization between prisoners and American citizens is a serious concern, particularly when it involves preferential treatment." "Learning to ride is preferential treatment?" Elsa asked. Her English failed her in her agitation, and she switched to German. "I wake at 5 in the morning. I work 8 hours hauling feed and cleaning stalls. On Saturdays, if the work is done, Mr. Holloway teaches me to ride. This is a crime?" Captain Collins spoke for the first time. "It's a question of perception, Miss Muller, and security. We need to ensure there's no exchange of information, no inappropriate relationships, no potential for complications." The implications were clear. They thought Jim wanted something from her, or that she was manipulating him for better treatment or information. The idea would have been laughable if it weren't so offensive. "Mr. Holloway is a good man who believes everyone should know horses," Elsa said quietly. "That is all. There is nothing more." The officers exchanged glances. "We'll be speaking with Mr. Holloway as well," Captain Weber said, "and with the camp commander. For now, all off-duty contact between you and American civilians is suspended pending review." Elsa felt something cold settle in her chest. "For how long?" "Until we're satisfied there's no security concern." That evening, Elsa sat on her bunk and tried not to cry. Greta sat beside her, silent and furious. "They can't stand it," Greta said finally, "that we're people to them. That we're not the monsters they need us to be." "He was just teaching me to ride," Elsa whispered. "I know," Greta said, "but kindness makes them nervous." Jim Holloway received his summons the next day. He drove to Camp Swift in his dusty pickup and sat across from the 2 intelligence officers with his hat in his hands. "Mr. Holloway," Captain Weber began, "we're investigating the nature of your interactions with one of the German prisoners assigned to your ranch, Elsa Miller." "I've been teaching her to ride," Jim said flatly. "Why?" Jim looked at the captain like he'd asked why water was wet. "Because she wanted to learn. Because I had the time. Because it's what you do." "What you do?" Captain Collins asked. "Where I come from, teaching someone to ride isn't a political act," Jim said. "It's just decent. She was afraid of horses, now she's not. That seemed worth doing." "You understand these are enemy prisoners," Captain Weber said. "I understand they are women who got caught up in a war they didn't start and didn't want," Jim replied. His voice stayed level, but something hard entered it. "I was in North Africa, Captain. I saw enough blood and death to last me 3 lifetimes. When I came back here, I decided I was done treating people like they're disposable just because someone told me they're the enemy." "That's a very idealistic perspective," Captain Weber said. "Maybe, but it's mine." Jim set his hat on his knee. "Elsa Muller is a hard worker. She shows up on time, does her job, doesn't complain. On weekends, when the work's done, I teach her to ride because she asked and because I could. If that's a crime, you'd better lock me up too." The officers asked more questions. About what they talked about, where they rode, whether she'd asked anything about troop movements or local geography. Jim answered each one with patient, stubborn honesty. No, she hadn't asked about anything military. Yes, they talked about horses in Texas and sometimes about Germany before the war. No, there was nothing inappropriate. Finally, Captain Weber closed his folder. Mr. Holloway, I believe you're well-intentioned, but these are complicated times. We have to be careful. Being careful is fine, Jim said. Being cruel isn't. There's a difference. He drove back to the ranch wondering if that difference would matter to the Army. 2 weeks passed. Elsa worked at the ranch, but Jim kept his distance, following orders. They didn't speak beyond necessary work directions. The other German women noticed but said nothing. Elsa threw herself into the labor. She mucked stalls with focused intensity, mended fence until her hands blistered, hauled feed bags until her shoulders ached. Anything to avoid thinking about Copper standing in the corral, about trails she'd ridden, about the one person in Texas who had treated her like a human being without agenda. On the third Friday, Colonel Morrison called her to his office. "Miss Muller," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit down." Elsa sat, spine straight, hands folded. Prison posture. "I've reviewed the intelligence report," Morrison said, "and I've spoken with Mr. Holloway at length. I've also checked with the other women on your work detail." Elsa waited. "I'm satisfied there's no security concern," Morrison continued. "Mr. Holloway is exactly what he appears to be. A rancher with old-fashioned ideas about hospitality and horse training. And you're exactly what you appear to be. A prisoner trying to make the best of an impossible situation." Relief flooded through Elsa so intensely she felt dizzy. "However," Morrison said, and the relief evaporated, "we live in complicated times. The war in the Pacific continues. Americans have lost sons and brothers and husbands to this conflict. Some people won't understand or appreciate unconventional relationships between prisoners and civilians. We're not," Elsa began. "I know," Morrison cut her off gently, "but perception matters. So here's what's going to happen. You may resume your riding lessons, but they'll be conducted with another American present, one of our guards or a ranch hand, and they'll take place during normal work hours, not on weekends. Agreed?" It wasn't what she'd hoped for, but it was better than nothing. "Agreed." "One more thing," Morrison said as she stood to leave. "The war in Europe is over. Germany is occupied. Repatriation will begin within the next 6 to 12 months. You should prepare yourself for that reality." Elsa nodded and left, the reality settling on her shoulders like a yoke. Jim met the news with a shrug and a dry smile. "Figured they'd want witnesses. That's all right. Tom here doesn't mind watching." Tom Martinez was one of Jim's ranch hands, a Mexican-American cowboy with 40 years of experience and a gift for saying nothing at all. He sat on the corral fence during Elsa's lessons, whittling or smoking, present but not intrusive. The first lesson back felt strange, self-conscious. But Copper was the same, patient and steady, and Jim was the same, offering corrections and encouragement. Within minutes, the awkwardness faded. "Let's try a lope today," Jim said. "That's between a trot and a gallop, smooth and rocking like a rocking horse." He demonstrated on Rebel, the 3-beat gait that looked effortless. Then it was Elsa's turn. Copper moved into the lope at a slight pressure from Elsa's heels. The rhythm was different from trotting, more fluid. For a moment, Elsa bounced, out of sync. Then she found it, the rocking motion that Jim had described. Her hips moved with the horse naturally, unconsciously. "That's it," Jim called. "Perfect." She loped Copper around the corral 3 times, feeling the wind in her face, the power of the horse beneath her, the absolute freedom of controlled speed. When she finally brought Copper back to a walk, she was breathing hard and grinning. Tom spoke for the first time in an hour. "That was real nice, señorita." August brought news of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the bombs that ended the Pacific War and changed the world. In the mess hall, the German women processed this information with the numbed horror of people who'd already seen too much. But for Elsa, life had narrowed to the rhythm of work and lessons. She could now lope, handle gaits from horseback, and even do basic roping work with a training dummy. Jim talked about entering her in a local rodeo for fun, though they both knew that would never be approved. "You're a natural," Jim said one afternoon in early September. Tom had wandered off to check a fence, leaving them briefly alone. "You've got good hands and a good seat. I've seen people ride for years and not have the feel you've developed." "You're a good teacher," Elsa replied. "Maybe." Jim adjusted his hat against the sun. "Or maybe you were just ready to learn." He paused. "I heard repatriation starts next month." Elsa had heard the same. German prisoners would be sent home in waves starting in October. The war was over. They were no longer needed or wanted. "Yes," she said quietly. "You have family to go back to?" "My father. Maybe, if he survived." The uncertainty of it sat heavy. Germany was rubble and chaos. The postal service had collapsed. She hadn't heard from him in over a year. "What will you do?" "I don't know," Elsa said honestly. "Try to find work, try to survive. Germany will be difficult for a long time." Jim was silent for a moment. Then, "There's a visa program for refugees and displaced persons. It's complicated, but it exists. If someone sponsored you, you could potentially stay." Elsa's heart stuttered. "Stay? In America?" "In Texas," Jim corrected. "There's plenty of ranch work. And you know horses now." He looked at her directly. "I'm saying if you wanted to stay, I could help make that happen. No strings, just offering." The offer hung in the air between them like morning mist over the creek. Elsa understood what it meant, the generosity of it, the risk Jim was taking even suggesting it. "I would like that very much," she said quietly. "But I don't know if it's possible." "Neither do I," Jim admitted. "But I know a lawyer in Austin who helped another prisoner apply. It's worth trying." That evening, Elsa wrote in her diary, "Today a cowboy offered me a future. I don't know if I'm brave enough to take it." The visa process was Byzantine. Forms in triplicate, affidavits, background checks, interviews. Jim hired the Austin lawyer, a man named Samuel Krebs who specialized in immigration cases. Krebs explained the situation bluntly. "The United States isn't enthusiastic about German immigration right now," he said. "But the Displaced Persons Act is being discussed in Congress. If it passes, it'll create pathways for refugees and certain POWs to apply for residency. You'd need an American sponsor with financial means, proof of employment opportunity, character witnesses, and evidence you're not a security risk." "I can provide all that," Jim said immediately. Krebs looked at him over his glasses. "Mr. Holloway, I have to ask, what's your relationship with Miss Muller?" "She's a friend who works on my ranch and wants to stay in America," Jim said firmly. "Nothing more, nothing less." Krebs nodded slowly. "Understood. But others will ask. And some will assume more. You need to be prepared for that." Jim's jaw set. "Let them assume." The paperwork took weeks. Elsa filled out forms until her hand cramped, detailing her life history, her military service, her capture, her time at Camp Swift. She submitted to interviews where stern men asked whether she'd been a committed Nazi, whether she believed in democracy, whether she understood American values. "I believe in kindness," she told one interviewer. "I believe in second chances. I believe in hard work. If those are American values, then yes, I understand them." Meanwhile, repatriation began. Women Elsa had lived with for months boarded ships and trains, heading back to a Germany they barely recognized. Greta left in early November, hugging Elsa hard before boarding the truck. "I hope you get your cowboy," Greta whispered. "He's not my cowboy," Elsa said automatically. "Maybe not yet," Greta replied with a knowing smile. By December, Camp Swift had mostly emptied. Elsa was one of 7 German women remaining, all with pending visa applications. They lived in a strange limbo, no longer quite prisoners, not yet free. Colonel Morrison moved them to a smaller barracks and relaxed restrictions. They could walk the campgrounds without escorts. They had access to a small library. Christmas approached with uncertain weight. On Christmas Eve, Jim appeared at the camp gates with a box. "Brought something," he said when Elsa met him in the visiting area. Inside the box was a leather saddlebag tooled with intricate patterns. "Made it myself," Jim explained. "Figured when you get that visa, you'll need proper riding gear." Elsa's eyes burned. Thank you. There's something else. Jim pulled out an envelope. It's a letter from the lawyer. Your visa was approved. For a moment, Elsa couldn't process the words. Then they hit her like a physical force. Approved? Displaced Persons Act passed last month. You qualified. You're free to stay if you want. Elsa sat down hard on the bench. Free. The word had almost lost meaning. But here it was, real and tangible as the leather in her hands. There's a job waiting at the ranch, Jim continued. Room and board, fair wages. You'd be working with the horses full time. Training, breaking, handling the breeding program. If you want it. If I want it? Elsa's voice cracked. It's all I've wanted since the day you first put me on Copper's back. Jim smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Then it settled. You'll be released from Army custody on January 2nd. I'll pick you up at 0800. That night, the 7 remaining women celebrated with contraband coffee and stolen cookies from the mess hall. They talked about futures that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. Lives in America, new beginnings, the strange mercy of a country that could have destroyed them, but chose transformation instead. January 2nd, 1946 dawned cold and clear. Elsa stood at the camp gates with a single duffel bag containing everything she owned. 2 changes of clothes, her diary, the Red Cross Bible she'd never read, and Jim's leather saddlebag. Colonel Morrison signed her release papers personally. Good luck, Miss Miller, he said, shaking her hand. I hope Texas treats you well. It already has, sir. Jim's pickup rumbled up at exactly 8 o'clock. Elsa climbed into the passenger seat, no longer a prisoner being transported, but a free woman accepting a ride. The distinction made all the difference. They drove through Bastrop and out into the countryside. The winter landscape was brown and dormant, but Elsa had seen the spring bluebonnets. She knew what was coming. I cleared out the foreman's cottage, Jim said. It's small, but it's got a wood stove and running water. Figured you'd want your own space. That's very generous. It's practical, Jim corrected. Can't have my horse trainer living in the main house. People would talk even more than they already do. Elsa smiled at that. Are they talking? Some. Small towns always talk. Let 'em. I know the truth, and so do you. They arrived at the WWII to find Tom and 2 other ranch hands waiting. The men tipped their hats respectfully, not to a prisoner or an enemy, but to their new colleague. Welcome aboard, Elsa, Tom said in his economical way. The cottage was indeed small, 1 room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a stove. But it had windows that looked toward the corrals and a door with a lock that was hers to control. After barracks and barbed wire, it felt like a palace. Get settled, Jim said. We start work tomorrow at 6. I'll introduce you to the horses that need training. That first night, alone in her cottage, Elsa lit the stove and made tea with the supplies Jim had stocked. She sat at the small table and opened her diary to the last blank page. January 2nd, 1946. Today I stopped being a prisoner and became a Texan. I don't know what tomorrow brings, but tonight I am free. I have work I love. And outside my window there are horses waiting. Perhaps this is what winning a war should look like. Not more hatred, but unexpected mercy. Not more walls, but open horizons. Not more fear, but a chestnut mare named Copper who taught me that trust is possible even after everything. Spring came again, and with it the blue bonnets Elsa remembered. But this time she saw them from horseback, riding fence lines and checking cattle with the easy competence of someone who'd earned her place. The work was demanding. Jim put her in charge of breaking 2 young horses, colts named Doc and Whiskey, who tested her patience and skill daily. She worked with them in the round pen, establishing trust and boundaries, teaching them to accept saddle and bridle, building the foundation for years of partnership. Tom watched from the fence sometimes, offering occasional advice in his sparse way. That one's stubborn, like his daddy, but he's got heart. But by summer, Elsa could cut cattle on horseback, rope training dummies with decent accuracy, and handle the breeding documentation that Jim hated doing himself. She proved herself not just competent, but gifted, able to read horses in ways that took most people decades to learn. The locals gradually accepted her presence. She shopped in Bastrop wearing Levi's and boots, her German accent softening at the edges, though never disappearing entirely. The grocery clerk stopped watching her suspiciously. The hardware store owner learned to save her the good rope. The postmaster delivered her mail without comment. Mail from Germany was rare and painful when it came. Her father had survived but was living in a bombed-out apartment in Bremen, elderly and struggling. Elsa sent money when she could, converted from her wages and mailed through the Red Cross. His letters were grateful but melancholy, a man who'd lost his country even though he'd never left it. "You should visit," Jim said when Elsa mentioned this during a lunch break. "Perhaps someday," Elsa replied. "When I have citizenship, when it's safer." Jim nodded, understanding. She was legal but fragile, a displaced person whose status could be revoked if she stepped wrong. Germany felt impossibly far away, and also like something she'd left behind intentionally. Autumn brought her first Texas State Fair. Jim entered several horses and asked if Elsa wanted to come along as his assistant. They drove to Dallas in a horse trailer, arrived before dawn, spent 3 days showing horses and watching rodeos and eating food that scandalized Elsa's German sensibilities. "How much sugar can one country consume?" she asked, staring at a funnel cake. Jim laughed. At the state fair, all of it. They won a ribbon for one of the colts she'd trained, 3rd place in the 2-year-old category. The judge specifically noted the horse's calm temperament and excellent groundwork. Jim accepted the ribbon, then handed it to Elsa. "Your work," he said simply. That ribbon hung in her cottage for years after. November brought the annual Bastrop Harvest Dance, held in the high school gymnasium decorated with corn stalks and autumn leaves. Jim mentioned it casually one evening while they were checking a mare with a sore hoof. "There's a dance Saturday," he said. "Most of the town goes. Live band, decent food. You'd be welcome if you wanted to come." Elsa's hands stilled on the mare's leg. Would I be welcome? Or would my presence make things difficult? Jim considered this honestly. Some folks might stare, but most know you by now. You're the horse trainer from the WWII, not a German prisoner anymore. That matters to people around here. Saturday evening, Elsa dressed in the one nice dress she'd bought in Bastrop, simple blue cotton that felt strange after months of jeans and work shirts. She met Jim at his truck, and they drove into town together. The gymnasium was packed with ranchers and their families, farmers, shopkeepers, teachers. A 5-piece band played Western swing on a makeshift stage. Long tables held casseroles and pies and coffee urns. Elsa felt every eye in the room track her entrance, but Jim walked in easy and confident, nodding to people he knew, which was everyone. Tom was already there with his wife Maria, who waved enthusiastically. "Elsa, come sit with us!" The evening unfolded in layers. Some people kept their distance, watching with reservation. Others approached with careful friendliness, asking about the horses, mentioning they'd heard good things, offering the tentative acceptance of small-town Texas. When the band started playing a 2-step, Jim appeared at her elbow. "You know how to dance?" "Not like this," Elsa admitted. "Easy to learn. Just follow me." He led her onto the floor and talked her through the basic steps. Quick, quick, slow, slow, moving in a circle counterclockwise around the room. Elsa stumbled at first, self-conscious under the watching eyes. But the rhythm was like riding. Once you found it, your body remembered. They danced 3 songs. By the 3rd, Elsa had stopped counting steps and started feeling the music. Jim was a good lead, steady and uncomplicated. When they returned to the table, Maria was grinning. "You two look good out there. She's a fast learner," Jim said. Later, an older woman approached their table. She had steel gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent 70 years under the Texas sun. "You're the German girl," she stated without preamble. "Yes, ma'am," Elsa replied carefully. "My son died at Normandy," the woman said. The table went silent. 22 years old, never made it off Omaha Beach. Elsa's throat closed. "I'm so sorry. I blamed every German in the world for 2 years," the woman continued. "Hated the whole country. Then I met you at the grocery store last month. Watched you help that Mexican family's little girl reach the sugar on the top shelf. Heard you laugh at something the clerk said. And I realized you're just a person who got caught up in the same nightmare that took my boy." She paused, and Elsa saw tears in the old woman's eyes. "I can't forgive what happened to my son, but I can stop hating you for it. So I wanted to tell you that. Welcome to Bastrop." The woman walked away before Elsa could respond. Maria reached across the table and squeezed Elsa's hand. "That was Clara Hendricks," Tom said quietly. "Her son was the only boy from Bastrop who didn't come home. What she just did, that took real courage." Elsa excused herself and went outside, needing air. The November night was cool and clear, stars brilliant in the darkness. She stood in the parking lot and let herself cry for Clara Hendricks' son, for all the sons and daughters lost, for the impossible grace of a mother who'd chosen compassion over hatred. Jim found her there after a few minutes. He didn't say anything, just stood beside her until she'd composed herself. "Ready to go back in?" he asked. "Yes," Elsa said. "I think I am." 2 more years passed. Elsa's visa became permanent residency. She filed for citizenship and began studying for the test, memorizing American history and government with the same focus she'd applied to horse training. The WWII prospered. Elsa's reputation as a trainer spread through the county, then the region. People brought difficult horses from as far as Houston for her to work with. She had a gift, they said, a way of understanding what a horse needed before the horse knew it itself. Jim never remarried. His first marriage had ended years before the war, his wife running off with a traveling salesman. He seemed content with his solitary life, his ranch, his horses, and his work. He and Elsa maintained their professional relationship with easy friendship, 2 people who understood each other without needing many words. But the town watched, and gossiped, and speculated. "They're waiting for you to make it official," Tom told Jim one afternoon in the spring of 1948. "Make what official?" Jim asked, though he knew perfectly well. "Don't be dense. You've been courting that girl for 3 years, whether you admit it or not. Every dance, every Saturday ride, every time you bring her first pick of the new colts. That's courting, even if you're too stubborn to call it that." Jim was quiet for a long moment. "She's been through enough. Don't want to pressure her into something just because it's expected." "Have you asked what she wants?" Tom countered. He hadn't. Jim realized he'd been so focused on giving Elsa space and freedom that he'd never actually asked if she wanted something more. That Saturday, after a long trail ride to check the north pasture fence, Jim pulled Copper and Rebel to a stop at the Overlook, where they'd had their first trail ride 3 years ago. The view hadn't changed. Endless Texas rolling out to the horizon, windmills and cattle and big sky. "Elsa," Jim said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy here? Honestly?" Elsa looked at him in surprise. "Yes. Very happy. Why do you ask?" "Because I need to know if you're staying because you want to or because you feel obligated. Because I helped with the visa and gave you a job." "Jim Holloway," Elsa said with rare intensity. "I stayed because from the first day you taught me to touch Copper's nose, you treated me like I mattered. You saw a person, not an enemy. You gave me back myself when I'd forgotten who I was. I would stay for that alone even if there was nothing else." "But is there something else?" Jim asked quietly. The question hung between them like morning mist. "I think you know there is," Elsa said finally. "I think we've both known for a while." Jim dismounted and helped Elsa down from Copper. They stood facing each other in the spring grass, horses grazing peacefully nearby. "I'm 43 years old," Jim said. "Set in my ways. Not romantic. I'll probably smell like horses until the day I die." "I already smell like horses," Elsa pointed out. "And I'm 31 and stubborn, and I'll probably always sound German no matter how long I live here. Wouldn't want you to sound any other way." He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket. Inside was a simple silver band with a turquoise stone. Texas turquoise, the color of the sky they rode under. "Will you marry me?" Jim asked. "Not because anyone expects it, Not because you owe me anything, but because I love you, and I want to spend whatever time I have left riding this land with you beside me." Elsa's eyes filled. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring on her finger, and they kissed for the first time there on the overlook. Horses standing witness, Texas spreading forever around them. They married in June at the small Lutheran church in Bastrop. The ceremony was simple. Tom stood up as best man, Maria as matron of honor. Half the county attended, curiosity and goodwill in equal measure. Clara Hendricks came and brought a quilt she'd made as a wedding gift. "For cold nights," she said, hugging Elsa tight. The ranch hands gave them a working honeymoon. 3 days where they handled all the chores while Jim and Elsa rode out to the line shack in the west pasture and pretended the world was nothing but horses and sky. Elsa became Elsa Holloway. The name felt strange on her tongue at first, then gradually settled into place like a saddle broken in through use. She gained her citizenship in 1949. The judge who administered the oath smiled when she listed her occupation as horse trainer and her sponsor as James Holloway, husband. "Welcome home, Mrs. Holloway," the judge said. Home. Texas. America. The words meant something now beyond geography. They meant the Double H Ranch and morning coffee before dawn rides, and Tom's quiet companionship and the feel of Copper's reins in her hands. They never had children. Elsa couldn't after complications from wartime malnutrition, and Jim said he'd never needed them anyway. "Got horses," he'd say, "and I got you. That's enough for any man." But they trained dozens of young riders over the years, local kids and ranch hands and anyone who wanted to learn. Elsa taught them the way Jim had taught her, with patience, with respect for the horse, with the understanding that riding was about partnership, not dominance. Years later, when reporters came asking about the German POWs in Texas, Elsa would tell her story carefully. She talked about fear and kindness, about propaganda dissolved by actual human contact, about a cowboy who believed everyone deserved to know horses. "What defeated the hatred in you?" one reporter asked. Elsa thought about this. "It wasn't one thing," she said finally. "It was 1,000 small things. A blanket on a ship, decent food, work that had meaning. But mostly it was one stubborn cowboy who looked at a terrified enemy prisoner and saw someone who could learn to ride." Jim lived to 89. When the cancer took him in 1991, half of Central Texas came to the funeral. The obituary listed his accomplishments, his war service, his ranch success, his contributions to local breeding programs. But it ended with, "He will be best remembered as a man who treated horses and humans with equal dignity and who believed in second chances." Elsa lived another 12 years after that, still riding Copper's great-great-granddaughter when she was 80 years old. The ranch stayed in operation, run by Tom's grandson and his wife. On her last birthday, surrounded by friends and former students, someone asked what she wanted to be remembered for. "For being brave enough to accept kindness when I'd forgotten what it looked like," Elsa said. "And for learning that fear can be overcome one quiet lesson at a time." She died peacefully in her sleep in the cottage Jim had given her 60 years earlier. The third-place ribbon still hanging on the wall beside a photograph of her sitting on Copper, both of them young and vital and alive. The story of Elsa Miller and Jim Holloway wasn't unique. Across Texas during World War II, thousands of German POWs encountered American hospitality that confused and transformed them. They expected punishment and found pragmatism. They expected hatred and found handshakes. They expected to remain enemies forever, and instead found the possibility of friendship. Army intelligence documented hundreds of these relationships with bureaucratic concern, filing reports on fraternization and potential security risks. But what they were really documenting was something more profound: the slow, steady erosion of propaganda through human contact. You can't hate someone after they've taught you to ride. You can't maintain ideological certainty after someone's shown you patience when you were terrified. The horses didn't care about uniforms or flags or the abstractions that started wars. They only cared about the hands that held the reins and the voice that spoke softly in the Texas heat. That was the real victory. Not tanks or bombs or treaties signed in formal rooms, but a chestnut mare named Copper, and a cowboy who believed in second chances, and a German woman brave enough to climb into the saddle despite everything she'd been taught to fear. The land remembers them still. The WWII Ranch operates to this day, training horses and riders in the same corrals where Elsa learned to lope. And somewhere in a Bastrop cemetery beneath the endless Texas sky, 2 headstones stand side by side with the simple inscription, "Partners in Life and Horses. 1943 forever,